Kevin is calling from Australia. Pronouns are he, him. He is a theist who says that I'm hoping the caller, this culture got this right. Kevin, you say that consciousness is proof of God. How so?
Well, I think it's as close to proof as you're going to get. I say theist.
Okay, hey, Kevin, hang on. I've paused you and muted because I want to make sure this goes well, and I'm probably still a little riled up from Ron. So, when you say that consciousness is proof of God, that's different from saying you think consciousness is as close to proof as you're going to get. Because what if the closest to proof you're ever going to get is still completely not proof and not warranting belief? So what we're going to need you to do is make your case and explain why you think this demonstrates God. There doesn't need any grandstanding about, oh, this is the closest to proof as you can get.
Yep.
It should be compelling. So go ahead.
Okay, so you talk about evolution in the context of natural selection and how humanity evolved over 11 billion years or whatever, and that's a great argument. But there is no reason why consciousness should have evolved randomly. That's my point.
Whoa.
And I think it's a fair input.
So that you're asserting that there's no reason why consciousness should have evolved through the normal natural process of evolution. How do you demonstrate that that shouldn't have happened?
I think it's simply illogical to assume that based on the ordinary random shuffling of atoms, that consciousness could have evolved out of that.
Okay, I'm going to stop talking here because I can't even see. Hang on. I'm going to stop talking here because I didn't even look at the screen. I was busy answering something else to see that I bet without even looking at him that Dara's chomping at the bit because every word out of your mouth is a misrepresentation of reality. So it's not about atoms randomly moving around. That is nothing at all. That evolution is not random atoms moving around. It is beyond ridiculous to characterize biological evolution as random atoms moving around. And I will let Dara explain it to you because I'm probably going to be too irritated to go beneath the kindergarten level of science.
Feel free to interject at any point, Matt. But yeah, I would just echo Matt's sentiment there, Kevin. I don't wish to be offensive, but the first thing that occurred to me when you described evolution was, tell me you don't understand evolution without telling me you don't understand evolution. So evolution is not random. It's based on natural selection, which is distinctly non-random. Natural selection is the process by which creatures survive if they are good enough. Sometimes people say survival of the fittest, but it's not really survival of the fittest. I think it's best understood as survival of the good enough. If something is good enough, it will pass its genes into the next generation. And that process is distinctly non-random, Kevin. So your description thus far of evolution reveals a lack of understanding about evolution. And that's a problem when evolution and your understanding of it appears to be pivotal to your argument, because your overall claim here is that evolution couldn't possibly have produced conscious creatures. And yet here we are, conscious, and the product of evolution. Now, that's not me claiming to know how it happened. It's called the hard problem of consciousness for a reason, Kevin. And that's another huge problem I have with this whole argument before you've even gotten it off the ground, because I worry that we're just drifting very quickly towards a God of the gaps argument. I'm also concerned about your description when Matt asked you, how do you know that evolution couldn't have produced consciousness? Your response was to say, well, that just doesn't make sense to you. So I'm also tempted to accuse you of an argument from ignorance fallacy. It's kind of like saying, I don't know how this could have happened without a God, therefore God. And that's hugely problematic, Kevin. So those are just some basic thoughts for now, but yeah, feel free to respond, or Matt, if there's anything else you wanted to add.
Because I don't want. Yeah, this is a tag team thing. So Kevin, if let's say, Kevin, do you accept anything about evolution, like changing allele frequencies over time? And sorry, what?
Yes.
Okay, so you're fine with us having common descent from other creatures, like you and I are both great apes.
Yes.
Cool. At some point in our ancestry, there was some creature that we wouldn't describe as conscious, right?
Well, yes.
Okay. And at some point, I mean, I'm here and I'm conscious, and my ancestors were. And so what you're saying is that can't happen without intervention from something beyond the natural physical processes of evolution, right?
Yes.
What evidence do you have that this cannot happen through those processes?
None.
Cool. Then you've just acknowledged that you don't have a good reason to believe that it's not possible.
So I take your point. I think what you're saying is reasonable, but I don't think it's reasonable to assume that it's happened by natural processes either.
Now, Kevin, if you don't have reason to exclude natural processes, I'm not saying that it's reasonable to say it necessarily happened by natural processes, but other than natural processes, what other options can you demonstrate are possible?
Well, there aren't any.
Okay. So by your own admission, we have no reason to think it's not possible. And we have no reason to think that anything other than natural processes are in play. So I would say it's a reasonable inference to suggest tentatively that natural explanations are more likely to be the correct explanation, essentially since there are no other known possible candidate explanations. But even if it's not correct or not reasonable, we can always just say we don't have an explanation for consciousness. But you called in to say that consciousness isn't possible through purely natural means, and then you acknowledge you have no evidence for that and no evidence for any means other than natural means. So what are we supposed to do with that?
I think the point is you're supposed to keep an open mind about it.
We have an open mind, and as soon as you show up with evidence from a reliable mechanism that suggests that there is a God and that God is responsible for consciousness, I'm pretty sure Dara and I will both accept that is the most reasonable conclusion based on the evidence. But when you call in to when you call in to say it's not possible, and then acknowledge when questioned that you don't have a justification for it, we're not going to believe that. Our mind is still open. You haven't done anything to convince us.
What's wrong with I don't know, Kevin?
There's nothing wrong with I don't know.
Cool.
So why would you then
wrong with I don't know?
So why do you claim to know that it's a God then? Or are you claiming that? Have I assumed too much?
I think it's as reasonable as an explanation as saying that evolution did it.
Okay. Wow. Here's the thing. How can the claim that a God did it be just as reasonable as the claim that evolution did it when you've already acknowledged you don't have evidence of that God or that mechanism, and you only have evidence for natural? How can one thing that's got a bunch of evidence for it be just as reasonable as something else that has no evidence for it? How can those two things be considered just as reasonable?
Sure. So where is the evidence that evolution led to consciousness?
We're not saying that, Kevin.
Wow, it's you were doing so good listening. You were doing so good listening. So we have consciousness. We need an explanation for it. Please list the candidate explanations for consciousness.
Well, okay.
Okay. Let me make this a little more clear, Kevin. If we find a dead body, we need to explore and say, hey, what are the potential explanations for this dead body? And so when I say list the candidate explanations, you list all the things that could have resulted in that dead body. We have consciousness. We need an explanation for consciousness. Can you list for me the potential explanations for consciousness?
I've already told you my answer.
You listed one. You said God did it. Do you have any other candidates?
Well, I don't see evolution leading to it.
Okay. Kevin?
I don't see the evidence. I think if the evidence existed, we would have found it.
No, sir. That is a fallacy. And you are ignoring the evidence, which we've already acknowledged. The natural processes that govern evolution are presumed to be sufficient to explain changes between species. The fact that you don't think it can lead to consciousness is irrelevant, Kevin. You have to, if you think it can't lead to if you think it can't lead to consciousness, you have to prove that. You don't get to just say, I don't see it. Well, nobody gives a shit if you see it. But you know what else? You've already acknowledged you have no evidence for anything other than naturalistic explanations. So when we're making a list of the candidate explanations for consciousness, natural evolutionary processes is one candidate, and I see no other candidates. God isn't a candidate because you don't have evidence for God. Non-natural or supernatural explanations aren't candidates because you haven't demonstrated those. In fact, you've already admitted that those don't have evidential support. So other than natural explanation, is there any other candidate explanation that you can point to? And the answer is no. And so whether or not the fact that you just, so here's the thing. Let's say that, no, listen.
One second.
Let's say that Dara,
sorry.
Let's say that Dara has a wound on his arm. And I say that wound is the result of natural circumstances. And you, Kevin, say, after looking at the wound, I don't believe that natural circumstances can lead to that. And I say, what can you demonstrate that else that could? We're in the same boat, so go for it.
Well, we are in the same boat, and I don't believe you presented evidence that evolution could lead to consciousness either. You say it's the only candidate,
shit,
and I
Kevin.
say you're wrong.
No, we did not. Wow. Kevin, you are claiming that evolution can't do something, and we're asking you to prove it. Can you prove that evolution can't result in consciousness? Yes or fucking no? No, you can't. So piss off.
Could you?
No, I'm not going to repeat it. I've had enough. It's exhausting. to get you to patiently sit there and agree to everything and acknowledge left and right that you don't have any evidence, you don't have any alternatives. Dara and I are not saying consciousness is in fact explained by evolution, although I think both of us would say that's a reasonable inference based on all the available evidence, and we list the candidate explanations.
It has a higher prior probability.
I don't think that it is even remotely surprising. It's like trying to say that you couldn't evolve an eye. Yes, you can. It's evolved many different times in many different ways. All consciousness is the ability to process information getting more and more complex. A few neurons, a neural network leading up to a brain. You're basically saying, I just can't believe that a brain can happen through evolution. And yet it has many, many times. Oh, yeah, but consciousness is something special. No, it's fucking not. But if you are going to claim consciousness cannot arrive from evolution, you have adopted a burden of proof, which you have not acknowledged multiple times in that call, you can't meet. So we don't care, Kevin. I have no time. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just 10 seconds. Even if we conceded that evolution can't produce consciousness, it wouldn't follow that therefore God did it. He didn't provide any independent evidence for his assertion that God is responsible. It seemed to just be, I can't think of a better way or a better explanation, therefore God, which is what I said at the outset, that this is one big fat argument from ignorance fallacy. And you got to bring more to the table than that, Kevin, I'm afraid.
Hello, I'm Jimmy Snow, Pokemon Master and Executive Producer on The Line. Would you like to support a specific show on The Line or The Line in general? There are special tiers on our Patreon and in our channel memberships. You can do just that. By the way, you could consider leaving a super thanks down below. You could also like, subscribe, and leave a regular comment. All of these are great. Now, I'm going to get back to crushing loneliness, but while I do that, why don't you check out one of these?